Okay. Utilitarianism. What is this about? Humans, of course, don't like suffering. We can have a discussion about how this relates to Buddhism in class. We don't like suffering, and we like pleasure. So everybody would rather have pleasure, and everybody would rather avoid suffering. There are some people who like pain, but you could argue that those people get pleasure from pain. So everybody wants what they want, and they don't want what they don't want. The problem in justice is trying to figure out who deserves to get what they want. And a lot of people complain that there are few people who get everything, and there are many people who get nothing. And a couple hundred years ago, some philosophers put a name to this feeling that we all have somewhere in ourselves that says it would be nice to try to take care of everyone. Utilitarianism basically says we should try to give happiness to everyone. We should try to give as much happiness to as many people as possible. And of course, this leads to a compromise. Because if you are one person and you could be maximum happiness, you could have everything, but you have to take from one person, we immediately have problems. If you have a roommate, you know this. If you have a family, you know this. If you have a relationship, you know this. Sometimes you have to do something you don't want to do so that somebody else can do what they do want to do. And the way that utilitarianism figures things out is basically putting it to math. If we have 10 cookies in the room, and we have 10 people in the room, and they're my cookies, I could eat them all, and then I would be 100% happy because I'd be like, I'd just be sitting there smashing cookies, and you guys would be hungry. According to a utilitarian, that's not correct. You should give one cookie to each person, because then one cookie is not really enough to make you full, but it brings you a good amount of happiness. You're like 70% happy. You wish you had another cookie, but you're really happy having the one cookie. So instead of making one person 100% happy, you make 10 people 70% happy, which is much better. So let's get into it. Utilitarianism, let's break this word down. Here, I'll show you it again. So utilit is like utility, like useful. Arian is just, don't think about that too much. It's just like a suffix. And then the ism suffix, you got to think about because you know this one. What is an ism? An ism, like Buddhism, capitalism, communism, or ist, a Buddhist, capitalist, communist, minimalist. What do these things mean? It's a person who believes in or practices an ism. So utilitarianism is a system of belief. This particular system of belief says that the right thing to do will bring the greatest good for the greatest number of people. 10 cookies, 10 people, everybody eats one cookie. That's the way to make the most happiness across most people. Take care of everybody, right? It sounds like a John Lennon song. It sounds like the dream of communism. A utilitarian is a person who follows utilitarianism. You could also use this same word as an adjective, just in the same way you can use minimalist like that. It's a minimalist piece. You can say this is a utilitarian idea. You can use it as an adjective. Utilitarianism was invented by Jeremy Bentham. This is his dead body. He lived it in his life. He also practiced utilitarianism in his death because he thought that the best way to make everybody happy was to let everybody live with his wonderful smiling face instead of letting it rot in the ground. This quote here is lovely. He says, the question is not can they reason nor can they talk, but can they suffer? Suffering for Bentham was the fundamental of ethics, which of course should make sense to you because Buddhism, the first noble truth, life is suffering, and the whole soteriological and ethical system of Buddhism is based around suffering, the truth of suffering, right? Utilitarianism is different because it doesn't accept suffering. It tries to get rid of the suffering, and it doesn't do this in the same way. It just tries to make people happy, and with Bentham's system, it tries to make people happy however they want to be happy. If you are happy by going to the orchestra and soaking up the beauty of art, that is your truth, and that is your happiness. If you are happy by picking up your smartphone and thumbing it with some game, that should be whatever. Whatever makes you happy makes you happy. There are no higher or lower pieces of art. Also, I'll draw your attention to this act utilitarianism. That means each act, each action was measured for how much happiness it produces for all of the people and how much pain it produces for all of the people. So it wasn't about rules. There was one rule, and that rule was the greatest good for the greatest number of people. John Stuart Mill fixed this little problem because it was difficult to look at every single thing you do and try to balance it with the utilitarian calculus. He came up with this idea of rule utilitarianism, where you would try to make a guiding principle, like a law, and that law would guide your actions in a way that was utilitarian. And I like this one. He said that a person may cause evil not to others, not only by his actions, but by his inaction. And in either case, he is justly accountable to them for the injury. So if you see somebody who is in need and you do not help them, that is an action. That's a choice. Not doing good is just as important as doing bad. So this idea with higher and lower pleasures comes from a famous quote where he says that it's much better to be a human being who is not satisfied than a pig who is satisfied. It's better to be Socrates, the famous philosopher, dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. So a higher human versus a lower human. And this comes back to the orchestra versus the video game on your phone. For John Stuart Mill, he made a choice with pleasures. And he said that there are good pleasures and there are bad pleasures. If you are eating food from 7-Eleven, it's not as good as food that's prepared by the greatest chef that ever lived, or something that's super healthy for you. He was basically saying that there are things that are higher and there are things that are lower. And how do you define that? Well, he basically says, if you are educated in all of them, you know what it is to sit in the orchestra and understand the depth of this music, and you understand what it is to play a video game, the wise person would prefer the higher pleasure. You can decide if you agree with him or not. I imagine some of you will not agree with him, and I hope you don't. None of these ideas are perfect, and they're just there for you to know what people have done in the past. And you can argue with them as much as you want. Let's see this stuff in action. Go to the trolley car problem, and you will see what utilitarianism is all about and what the greatest good for the greatest number of people is all about. All right. Good luck.